there. Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? We're not starting yet. We don't start till 6:30. It's 6:29, you know. So anyway, everybody's doing good tonight? I met at least a half a dozen that were not in a good mood tonight when they came through the door. I had to open the door for them. Yeah. So anyway, well, you know what? We're in for a great night tonight. And this is a special night. You know, when we have a chance to have special guests, which isn't as often as I would really like to have, because some of our special guests, you know, come all the way from Israel. And so I came all the way from Israel last week just to see what it was like to be special, you know. And it's really wasn't that special. But anyway, okay, it's 6:30. We're starting now. All right, listen to all of our streamers. We welcome you to Tuesday Night Live. And for all the people who are here tonight, why don't we give it up for the streamers right now, okay? This is so good. I heard from a variety of people, are you streaming it on Tuesday night? Are you streaming it Tuesday night? And so anyway, we are streaming it. We weren't able to do that Sunday night, but we're doing it Tuesday night because we've got the power and the equipment here, you know. And so anyway, the workhorse back there is Mr. Kyle. His job is to make us always to sound better than we sound, right? So listen, who's here tonight that has never had a chance to hear Elliot Chodoff? 3 people, and you still came. This is amazing. I see some new hands. So listen, Elliot is one of those guys that brings an enormous amount of information about the times we're living in, about what's going on in the Middle East and some of the other parts of the world. And gosh, I don't know, we've known each other for a number of years. And he actually looks older, and I look the same. And that's why we didn't stream on Sunday night. Anyway, it's always a privilege and a pleasure when we get a chance to be together and have him for these kind of events like tonight. And so his background is one that involves not only teaching for 25 years at Haifa University, but also teaching at a variety of other universities as well before he took the job there in Haifa. But he also is an expert on Middle East conflict and how do you understand what's going on in the Middle East? And so this is one of the things that helps us tonight. So Sunday night he spoke about Iran for the most part, and tonight we're going to do something completely different. And you want to know what it is? Okay, because he's going to tell you about. He's going to tell you about. So Elliot, come on, get up here. Give him a welcome tonight, will you? So you remember how we rehearsed this conversation till 7, cliffhanger, okay. Cliffhanger, break, come back, and bring the thing in for a deeper dive and a great landing. So anyway, welcome to Tuesday Night Live.
Thank you.
Bless you.
All right. Thank you. Make me earn it. You're going to give me the high sign like 30 seconds before I have to go over the cliff?
The clock's right there.
Till when? Tell me again. 7?
The big hand's on the 12.
See what I have to put up with. Not only did I have to fly from Israel. Okay. What I want to talk about tonight is around October 7th. When I say around, I'm not going to go into any great detail about what happened on that day, because I presume you're familiar. And I don't need to go into the horrific graphics of that day. It was unbelievable. Those of us I lived through it at the distance of being 2 hours away, and then I got called up to the reserves to the Gaza Division 10 days later. So when I got down there, it was over, but it wasn't over. The Gaza Division headquarters had been overrun on the 7th. I slept in a room with bullet holes in the walls and door. Kind of a stark reminder every evening and morning. And in and of itself, it was unbelievable. And I say that because the way I want to go into what I'm doing tonight is a sort of oblique, not direct, but oblique counter to a lot of the nonsense that I see going on around social media and other places today, that it was a setup. Israel let it happen intentionally. The extreme case of that, Netanyahu let it happen as an excuse to commit the genocide in Gaza. How many lies can you get into one short sentence? Okay, etc. I'm not going to counter those sort of directly one-to-one, but I want to start by saying that the event of October 7th, because of its shockingness, lends itself to conspiracy theory, because it was so unbelievable. And unbelievable lends itself to, all sorts of interesting and strange ideas. Since October 7th, in part in some of my position in the Army, and I still serve, I'll let you in on one of my dirty little secrets. In just under a month, I'm going to be 70, and if I make it. And I still am an active reserve officer. They want to get rid of me, but they find it difficult. But in any event, in part because of my reserve service and what I do in the reserves, and in part because it's my profession. I'm a military sociologist, I'm a strategist. The what happened, as shocking as it was, leads to a much more important question of how it happened, why it happened. And here I have to tell you, first of all, what I'm going to tell you tonight is my conclusion. Okay? I don't speak for the military. The military wouldn't want me to speak for them. And I say it hesitantly because it's a conclusion drawn from the knowledge that I have, and I won't give away classified information, but there's enough open source in Israel in particular, in Hebrew, but open, that we have access to, plus things that I've learned, again, from having been there and that sort of thing, which is not classified. But still sort of trying to come to this idea, this conclusion of how does this horrific event happen to, and I'll put this in quotes, the best army, certainly in the Middle East, if not in the world. Okay, so I'll tell you first and foremost, the minute they label you the best, you're in trouble. And if you start believing it, you're even in more trouble. And what I'm going to describe is a combination of errors, bad decisions, and overall very, very human behavior. And here, we tend to look upon our leaders, our military leaders, especially the grand ones, as larger than life. Those who've served in the military, that is not the case. But you sort of think so at the beginning, and then you realize, they're human beings just like the rest of us. We expect them, and here I'll tell you as an officer and as somebody who analyzes the military, we expect them, and correctly expect them, to do things that are not humanly normal. Okay, and I actually argue this in general about the military, again, as a sociologist, that one of the jobs of the military is to create an environment where people do abnormal things as if they were normal. Right? If you give the order, attack that machine gun position, normal is not me. Right? Yes, sir is abnormal. But we create an environment, a disciplinary, a training, and a social environment that makes the abnormal normal in order for a military to work. Okay? Land your aircraft on an aircraft carrier at night in the middle of a storm. Are you out of your mind? Okay, so I think you understand what I'm talking about. And the same is true with leadership. And leadership as well tends to normal human, because that's what they are and we are. And those human weaknesses, those human frailties, the human condition, those human tendencies very often take us someplace that seems completely reasonable right up until it isn't. So I want to start with this. There was an intelligence failure on October 7th, 2023. And naturally, the leadership of the country, political and military, latched onto it and said two things, one of which is true, the other which is not, and both are irrelevant. The true is, if we had only known, it wouldn't have happened. How many of you have ever said that in your lives? Okay. Second, because of that failure, Hamas achieved what it achieved on the day of the 7th. That's false. It's false. And they are both irrelevant because of the falsity of the second. And that is that the real failure on October 7th wasn't the intelligence failure, it was the inability of the forces on the ground to stop Hamas. In other words, an army that will only operate on perfect intelligence is living in a fantasy world. Anybody, any of us, who is in a position where surprise is catastrophic has probably put ourselves in a place that's not particularly healthy to begin with. Surprise is surprise, but guess what? Life is full of surprises. And most of them are not good. Right? Sometimes they say, an optimist is never pleasantly surprised. A military should be clinically, pathologically paranoid. Of course they're out to get me. Everybody's out to get me. And they're out to get me all the time. But that's a very hard place to be. It's hard psychologically. It's hard emotionally. It's hard organizationally. It's hard operationally. And over time, it fades. I'm going to add one more element to this before I go into sort of the deeper roots. The day before October 7th was the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. Also, a surprise attack that was nearly catastrophic in its first days. Those who are familiar with the history of that war, the first 3 days, especially on the Golan, were very, very touch and go. And immediately the comparison was made between the intelligence failure of Yom Kippur and the intelligence failure of October 7th. And here I will tell you there were two enormous differences between those two wars. One in the positive and one in the negative. In the negative, the intelligence failure of Yom Kippur prevented the mobilization of the reserves. And the regular army, the IDF regular army, was insufficient in strength to stop the Syrian and Egyptian onslaught without the reserves. Okay, I'll mention from its inception, the IDF in 1948 up until, sometimes done better, and in the past couple of decades done worse. The idea was, and this was Ben-Gurion's idea, and he was right, a country like Israel can't afford a large standing army. It's a small country. So it needs a small standing army and a large reserve component that can be called up, and when it's not needed, go back and do what it needs to be doing, farming and working and whatever, because otherwise you have no economy. And calling up the reserves is a critical component, especially doing it in a timely fashion, because the regular army was simply not designed to do what it was forced to do on Yom Kippur 1973. And I never argue with miracles. Those 3 days were miraculous, as well as heroism, professionalism, excellent command skills, a little bit of luck. Never hurts. So that's the negative of Yom Kippur vis-a-vis relative to the 7th. But another thing about Yom Kippur was much more positive and critical, and its absence cost us on the 7th and in the immediate aftermath, and in part all through the war at different levels. Prior to October 7th, the last time the Israeli army, military, fought a major war was 1982. There were all sorts of operations, skirmishes, Hamas here, Hezbollah there, 2006. But the last time the Israeli army deployed divisions for maneuver, with joint forces operations, with air support and artillery support in combat up front, was 1982. What that means is that by 2023, there was not a single officer in the IDF of any command level who had combat experience commanding major formations in the field. They commanded platoons, they commanded companies, some of them battalions, but even their battalions were rarely used in the course of those years. Most of the operations were company and platoon level. For those who are familiar with military organization, battalion is a major step up in organization. It's got a staff. It's very different. So you have a command echelon of generals and colonels and lieutenant colonels who have no experience except for exercises. And with all due respect, and I've been through my share of exercises, it's not the real thing. By the way, we've never lost an exercise. No matter what the circumstances, 2 hours before the end, miracle occurs here. And we win. So, and you know it. I've been in exercises where I wrote the conclusion 2 days before the end of the exercise. It's one of the reasons they don't like reserve officers, because we do that sort of stuff. So I want to give you an extreme case, but still an illustrative case of 1973 of the Yom Kippur War. And again, it's an extreme case, but nonetheless not extreme in the sense of unique. There were many others along similar lines. I imagine most of you, if not all of you, have heard the name Ariel Sharon. Now, whether you agree with his politics and his policies, or you disagree, and I did both, because that's the way it is in politics. You agree with some stuff, and you disagree with other stuff. Ariel Sharon was a world-class historical military genius. You can't take it away from him. And we've had a few of them in the IDF. He was certainly one of them. I had the opportunity to interact with him once in a military setting. He was already a minister in the government, but he came to, and he left us like that. Why do I mention Sharon? Because in 1948, remember we're talking about 1973, in 1948, he fought in Israel's War of Independence, and he was wounded. In the early 1950s, he established the Israeli Army's first Special Forces Commando Unit, what was known as Unit 101 for those who are familiar. stolen from the 101st Airborne Division. Okay. In 1956, during the Sinai campaign, he was a colonel. He was the brigade commander of the paratroopers brigade, a battalion of which parachuted into Sinai behind Egyptian lines. He wasn't in the jump. He led his men across Sinai on the ground to join up with the battalion that jumped. Into the 1960s, command and staff positions. In 1967, he commanded an armored division in Sinai in the Six-Day War, during which he launched and commanded one of the two great battles of his career, Katef Abu Agela, for those who are familiar, two battles that are studied in every command school, in every army in the world, except for Israel. In 1970, he became commanding general of Southern Command, in other words, of the entire South. In 1973, he retired from the regular army as a commanding general of Southern Command, went into the reserves to command a reserve armored division. He was eminently overqualified for that position, as were many others who were parallel to him. So when the war broke out, and of course in that war he commanded his division in the crossing of the Suez Canal and the beginning of the encirclement of the Egyptian army. That was the second one of his sort of historical grand. And he did a whole bunch of other stuff along the way. You had commanders, generals, colonels who had that kind of combat experience. Remember, the Six-Day War is only 7 years before the Yom Kippur War. There's a war of attrition in between. In other words, these are people with enormous, enormous combat experience on their command level. So the Yom Kippur War bounce back is very, very fast. 2-3 days. Going into 2023, it looks different. You've got a bunch of very bright, and here I want to be very clear, very, very, very intelligent people who've studied the stuff, they've learned it, they've played it, but they've never experienced it. And when you've learned it and played it, anybody, again, who's familiar, you learn how it's supposed to be. The problem is the real world is never the way it's supposed to be. And if you don't have the experience to look at it and say, that doesn't fit the book, but that's real, as opposed to looking at it and saying, that doesn't fit the book, it must be wrong, the book is right. Okay? That's part of what happens going in. To understand how we get there, and also to put lie to the claim that this is all a last-minute decision by pick your villain, Netanyahu and friends, to let Israel be attacked. October 7th's failure begins in the early 1990s. When Ehud Barak was chief of staff of the IDF, Ehud Barak, and again, I'm not going to get into politics. By the way, I'm not going to do American politics either. I'm an honor graduate of the Israeli Army Mines and Demolitions course. And one of the first things they teach you is don't walk into a minefield. We don't do politics. Policy, yes. Politics, no. Ehud Barak was the most decorated officer in the IDF in his day, commanded the most elite Special Forces unit, Sayeret Matkal, for those who are familiar. The man who took over for him, that was the lieutenant colonel's position. The man who took over when he moved on was Yoni Netanyahu, Bibi's brother, who was killed at Entebbe, leading that unit on the Entebbe raid. Just give you an idea. Serious character. And Ehud Barak, very, very clever, very, very intelligent, comes up with an idea in the early 1990s. He's going to change the face of the IDF. The way the IDF works into the 1990s is anachronistic. We're in a new era. By the way, here I have to say, as an aside, two things. One is, full disclosure, I am devoutly low-tech. I navigate with the sun, the moon, and the stars. A compass on a bad day. GPS and I have a hate-hate relationship. Whenever I turn it on, it immediately says, turn into the water. Seriously, I believe that technology has its place, but I am thoroughly and utterly opposed to the idea that we can replace human beings with technology. And as I'm sure many of you know, the techies think, you know why there's artificial intelligence? Because there's no natural intelligence. Right? This idea that we can make the Army new and recognize this new era. The second thing I was going to tell you is every single generation since Adam and Eve has said we are in a new technological era. Without fail. And now I'll tell you one more thing that's relevant to us today. The more advanced the technology, the shorter its lifespan. Okay? I see enough people here who appreciate this from memory experience. I grew up in a house where there was a telephone on the wall with a dial. Remember those? That telephone stood on that wall for 15 years. The same phone. And then we went advanced. We got push button. This contraption is good for 2 years at best if you don't drop it in water. Why? Because in 2 years, the software that it's going to need to drive is beyond its capability. That's what I mean by short lifespan. This thing does amazing stuff. It doesn't make a phone call very well. And that's also part of it. Okay? So we're going to replace people with technology. We're going to train people up to a super high level and create what Ehud Barak said, tzava katan v'chacham, a small, clever army. I think he was actually thinking of himself as a little guy and he thought he was clever. Now, I'm going to end with this thought because I can't see the clock. Napoleon Bonaparte, despite the fact that he was French, understood some stuff about armies and warfare. He didn't win, but it's because he was French. Napoleon famously wrote, "God favors the large battalions." Right? Tongue in cheek, but big battalions, all other things being equal, obviously, they can't be incompetent, but at equal competence, big battalions defeat small battalions. And lest you think that that's an early 19th century idea that no longer applies, General Petraeus, remember him? Who commanded the 101st Airborne Division in Iraq in 2003. While he was in Iraq commanding the 101st Airborne, and he was very much a quality guy. The 101st is the 101st, the Screaming Eagles. He said, sometimes quantity has a quality all its own. And Ehud Barak comes along and says, no, we're going to have a small army. It's going to be efficient. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be made up of the best of the best of the best of the best. with technology. And that puts us on a path that's going to lead to October 7th. It's 6:59, and I know if that turns to 7, he's going to say I'm late. So we'll take our break now, and I'll see you when we come back.
So you guys, we're not starting yet. We're not starting yet. But for those of you who wish we were starting, we're not starting yet. But I wanted to give you a good announcement, okay? And here it is. My radio partner, Aaron Lipkin, is going to be with us on Tuesday night, March 3rd. Tuesday night, March 3rd. Aaron Lipkin, who lives full-time in Israel, he'll be here. He'll be speaking. But on March the 1st, which is a Sunday, he's going to be speaking Sunday morning, and he is going to be doing a phenomenal presentation on Joshua's altar and the redemptive heart of God. So at Deer Flat Church. And I think he's going to be at Chabad Synagogue in Boise on Saturday morning, and he's going to do the presentation there. So he's going to be spending Shabbat in Boise, and then as the Sabbath comes to a close, we're going to bring him over here to this section of the valley, and he'll speak on Sunday both hours, and then he's here with us Tuesday night. And he's one of those guys that, just like Elliot, you're gonna love what his presentation is. It is amazing. He always tells people on the radio, "And I am the amazing teacher," you know. And so anyway, but that is one of those things that I think you would enjoy very, very much. And so anyway, mark that down and keep it in mind, and we'll remind you about it a little bit more as we get through February. But anyway, so appreciate you coming tonight. We got some great streamers streaming with us tonight, which appreciate them hanging with us. And where's our main man? We're ready for you. Come on. We're ready for you. So, did you ever get an autograph from Ehud Barak?
No.
You didn't?
I think you wanted to sign a court-martial.
Court-martial.
So we have this idea. We're going to make a small, professional, high-quality army. Now, and high-tech. Now, this is enticing. It's cheap. It speaks to Israel, the startup nation. And as you know, Israel's a high-tech madhouse. It speaks to the army as well, because the regular army in the IDF, the command echelon, is very, very, very young. And I'm just going to say a few words about it, but just to give you an idea. The Israeli military does not have academies. With the exception of pilots and naval deck officers, everybody is up through the ranks. The chief of staff of the IDF was a private once. Go in at 18, you're serving for 3 years. There's not a lot of time to do this. You're a sergeant by the time you're 19. And if you're selected, you go to officer school, the equivalent of the U.S. military's OCS. And 19 or 20, you're a second lieutenant commanding a platoon with a high school diploma. Right? U.S. military, it's virtually unheard of for a commissioned officer not to have a bachelor's degree in something. Okay? If you're good, you're a captain by the time you're 23, commanding a company. If you're really good, you're a lieutenant colonel by the time you're 28, commanding a battalion. That is very young. Now, they're amazing people, talented beyond belief. The IDF, if it does one thing incredibly well, it's selection of personnel. Incredible. And I'm a tough grader. So the people in the slots, Not 100%, obviously, there's always a clunker somewhere, but the people in the slots invariably are astoundingly talented. And you know, talent covers a multitude of sins. Until you reach a certain point where you need training and professionalism because your talent just isn't a big enough fork to handle all that spaghetti. But they're young, and young means the tech stuff speaks to them. The idea that we can do it this way, cleanly, neatly, speaks to them. The Army, for a whole bunch of reasons that I'm not going to go into now, simply because it's too long and involved, goes on an efficiency kick. And I will say this, armies, militaries, should not be efficient. They need to be effective. By the way, it's true about a lot of things. Efficiency and effectiveness are not the same thing. They are actually at odds with each other. And a good system, and particularly a military system, chooses effectiveness to be done as efficiently as possible, but effectiveness by definition is not efficient. Because if you don't have some waste built in, when things go really wrong, you're not going to have what you need. Right? As long as everything's working smoothly, it's brilliant. Zero waste, zero waste. And then you suddenly need twice as much as you thought you needed, and you don't have it because you were so efficient. Efficiency is a constant assessing. All right, what have we used? What's left over? If it's left over, we don't need it for next year because we didn't need it. And as the Army becomes smaller and more efficient, it stops using reserves, slowly but surely. Reserves are inefficient. We're expensive because not only the Army doesn't pay us, but the country does. But every day I'm in reserves, I'm not working and making money and paying taxes. Inefficient. They also don't particularly like the reserve officers. We're older. We're more educated. We're more experienced. And we really don't care very much about anything but the mission. Because that's what we're doing there. All right, just so that you understand, I get paid for a day of reserve duty. I get about $150 for that day. I get no pension. The $150 is not connected to my rank or my position. I go, I come home, it costs me whatever it costs me, including gas. And a week later, I get a deposit in my account. I'm not complaining. But what it means is we don't care about all that stuff. They do, and I understand why. They have careers, promotion, benefits. I say that not critically. It's human. So you guys, we don't want to hear how it was in your day. Sounds familiar, right? And that begins a degradation as well. Reserve units are not called for training. Training's expensive. A point is reached about a little over 10 years ago. You know the saying where the only tool you have is a hammer, all your problems are nails? Well, when your military has now been contracted to a certain point, it's not capable of accomplishing the missions that it would have had 10 years ago. What do? You do research, you do studies. Armies are really good at studies. And you conclude that there aren't going to be any more major wars. And I can give you all the good reasons of why they were right, but they were wrong. Well, if we're not going to have any major wars anymore, we don't need all those Apache attack helicopters. They're expensive. They're expensive to purchase. They're expensive to maintain. The pilots are expensive. The maintenance is expensive. We don't need 4 squadrons of Apaches. 2 is enough. So we shut down half of our Apache helicopter force. By the way, now we're buying another 4 squadrons. Oops. Tanks. Tanks are obsolete. Who needs tanks? They're big, they're heavy, they're noisy, they're greasy, and they cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money to make, to maintain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's close half of our tank brigades, and let's cut the remaining ones in strength by 33%. So we still have half as many tank brigades, but we don't have half as many tanks. Because once upon a time, a brigade would have 90 tanks, now it's got 60. But it's still a brigade. And this is done repeatedly through the system. It's even worse in the infantry. I'm an infantry officer, so it's personal. But it's worse in the infantry for a very interesting reason. You know, Patton, who knew a few things about warfare, once famously told Eisenhower over the radio, "Ike, my men can eat their belts, but my tanks need gas." And what he was really saying is, you can get men and women to do things under less than optimum circumstances. But if you run out of gas, the tank is totally useless. If its transmission blows, it's gone. If I sprain my ankle, all right, so it hurts. But I can also do something else. A tank has a crew of 4. It doesn't work with a crew of 3. An infantry platoon, for our purposes, has 27 soldiers in it. It'll still be a platoon with 20. And if you can do it with 20, you can do it with 19. And if you can do it with 19, you can do it with 18. And you can reduce the force, maintain the organization level, and still make believe you've got a full force there. All of this is going on going into 2023. Procedures are inefficient. And I'm just going to give you one example. For those who are familiar with what happened on the morning of the 7th, this will perhaps help as a partial explanation. Every army in the world has a procedure or an order, varying names, but ultimately boiled down to dawn alert. Dawn is the most vulnerable time for attack for a whole bunch of reasons. I won't go into the details. It's not that. Everybody knows it. And a half an hour or so before dawn, in outposts, in the line, everybody's gotten out of bed. Everybody goes to their combat positions, think battle stations in the Navy. Same thing is true in outposts and fortifications. The firing positions are doubled up and tripled up. The logistics, the war room, the cooks and the bakers are at the ammunition to run ammunition up. Everybody's ready. And it happens not just on that level, but the command level above. In other words, the platoons in the field, the companies, at the battalion level it's done as well. Everybody's up. And when it's decided, a half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour after dawn, nothing's happening, the word comes down, return to normal, return to routine. The night shift goes to bed, and you go back to routine. That is an extremely inefficient procedure. Extremely. And it's done every single morning, 365 days a year. For 2 years, it's been being done all through the history. But the guys who are there are young. They remember it from 3 years ago and from 4 years ago, and the captains from 5 years ago. And 5 times 365 days a year, nothing happened. This is so wasteful. Cancel it. So somewhere around 2020, they cancel it. And in 2021, nothing happens. It justifies it. And in 2022, nothing happens. It justifies it even more. And now the guys who are there don't even remember that there was such a thing. So at 6:29 in the morning on October 7th, when the rockets start falling on these outposts, most of the people are in bed. Because where else would they be at 6:30 in the morning? Breakfast only starts at 8. And I mentioned and emphasized that there were other things. But to give you an idea how it was very reasonable. It made a lot of sense. And it was absolutely, utterly, thoroughly wrong, catastrophic. I mentioned earlier that the army should have been able to hold that line. The line around Gaza is held by a division, what's known as the Gaza Division. A division in the Israeli army, what's known as an Ugda in Hebrew, it's actually what would be, in U.S. terms would be called a divisional task force. It doesn't have a fixed number, but it has a fixed bracket. Between 7,500 and 11,000 troops. I'm going to say that number again. Between 7,500 and 11,000. On the morning of October 7th, the Gaza Division had 750 soldiers in the line, half of whom were non-combat. I'm sure you've seen the stories and the pictures of the female soldiers, the observers. They were counted in that number. So it's no surprise the division was overrun. Now, that didn't happen on October 6th or October 5th. That was a degradation that had been going on for years. Because once again, why do we need 7,500 troops along this line? Nothing's happening here. And the answer, of course, is what the old guys say. You do it because that's what the book says to do. I was telling some people outside, I won't go into the details of it. I was in an operation. I set something up, and I took a sniper along with me. And as we were going out, somebody said to me, another officer said, "Why are you taking a sniper team?" I said, "Because the manual says you're supposed to take a sniper team." And he said, "Well, how do you know that?" I said, "Because I wrote the manual." Of course it's Holy Writ. Now, lest you think this is an exclusively Israeli phenomenon, I want to tell you an American story. You've heard of Pearl Harbor. That was America's Yom Kippur, right? So, in the manual, it says that a fleet at anchor in a harbor deploys torpedo nets. Torpedoes, for those who are not familiar, are far more damaging to ships than bombs. Let it be sufficient to say there are lots of reasons, but the damage is done below the waterline. Makes it kind of difficult to float. So you put out torpedo nets. Torpedo nets stop torpedoes. They are a pain in the neck. They're on booms. Every time a ship enters or leaves, the booms have to be opened, closed again. It's a lot of work. They're heavy. It's annoying. The nets have to be maintained. And some clever person came to a conclusion. Pearl Harbor is too shallow for aerial torpedoes. You don't need torpedo nets. And that was approved because, by the way, it's true. When an aircraft drops a torpedo, it hits the water, it dives, and then it comes up again. In the ocean, that's not a problem. In Pearl Harbor, it would have hit the bottom. And everybody knew it because a torpedo is a torpedo and physics is physics and there's nothing you can do about it. Everybody knew that Pearl Harbor was too shallow for aerial torpedoes. Everybody includes the Japanese, who didn't say, oh, well, then we can't use torpedoes there now, can we? They said, no, let's figure out a way to use them. They put very large plywood fins on their torpedoes so that when they were dropped from the airplanes, they didn't dive, they hit the water and skimmed. And they used torpedoes at Pearl Harbor to devastating effect. The book, the manual, now I can come up with a good reason not to do it. So again, this is human. It's human thinking. It's not criminal. It's sloppy. It's undisciplined. But it's efficient. Right up until the torpedoes start hitting the hulls of your battleships. And it's not so good. So again, I don't want you to think that this is a uniquely or exclusively Israeli phenomenon. I can, by the way, give you other historical examples, but I think you understand my point. That is the situation that happens going into October 7th. On top of that, we have a political decision-making echelon that has completely misread the situation. And here I have to tell you, I'm not a Bibi Netanyahu fan. I am not a Bibi Netanyahu hater. I am an equal opportunity critic. I calls him as I sees him. You do something good, I'll tell you it's good. You do something not so good, I'll tell you it's not so good. Netanyahu, first and foremost, has to take responsibility because he was prime minister on October 7th. I'm a Truman guy, the buck stops here. Doesn't matter. And if you've been following some of the political goings-on in Israel, they're trying to figure out what he knew and what he didn't know at 2 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the morning. I will tell you that's all irrelevant. That's not where the problem was. Because if the army knew enough to inform Bibi Netanyahu at 3 in the morning that there was a catastrophe coming, the army was able to do it all by itself. The army didn't know and it didn't tell him. There were indicators, for sure. They were misread, for sure. For reasons that I'm going to go into, as well as some that I've already discussed. But you know, hindsight is 20/20. When you're sitting in there and you get information that doesn't fit your paradigm, it's called confirmation bias. You discount it. They knew something was going on. They didn't know what. They knew enough that at 3 or 4 in the morning, the chief of staff called for an emergency general staff meeting on the morning of the 7th at 8:30. He didn't know it was going to be 2 hours too late. 8:30 in the morning on a Sabbath holiday is an extraordinary move. He couldn't know that the time to call that meeting was 5 a.m. Okay? But again, what's the paradigm? The paradigm was that Hamas is deterred. And I've researched Hamas, I've researched Hezbollah, I'm talking about pre-October 7th. You cannot deter an extreme, a radical jihadi terrorist organization. You can manipulate its short-term behavior, but that doesn't change its overall view. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I wrote in one of my papers, or my studies, is that prudence should not be confused with moderation. In other words, the fact that they behave prudently not to get their heads kicked in doesn't mean they've suddenly become Western liberal Democrats. I'm going to say one more thing about Netanyahu before I go into the topic itself. Not only was not Netanyahu prime minister on the 7th, he had been prime minister almost nonstop. There was a short period where he wasn't, for a decade prior to the 7th. And that's important. And I want to give you, again, an American analogy. 9/11 happened under George W. Bush. And once again, the buck stops here. He was president. But W had become president only the prior January. Prior to that, we had 8 years of Bill Clinton. And here, once again, I'm not talking politics. I'm seriously not. Al-Qaeda didn't start operating in January 2001. It goes back into the 90s, and therefore the previous administration bears some responsibility. And here again, more or less, 30, 40, 50, I'm not doing that. But the Bush administration inherits it, doesn't change it, and for that it's responsible, but it inherits it. And you know, it's the nature of the beast, typically, when you inherit, you're inheriting a huge amount. You don't get to it so fast. We've managed with this up until now. We'll continue. And of course, that was a mistake. Netanyahu can't make that same claim. Everything that brings us to October 7th happens on his watch, including the billions that he permits Qatar to hand over to Hamas, including the idea that Hamas is really only interested in work permits to improve the lot of the population of Gaza, and so on and so forth. How could he be so wrong? And I'll tell you how. Not because he's stupid, because of mindset, because of paradigm thinking, because of education. By the way, only really intelligent people can make incredibly stupid mistakes. Bibi Netanyahu is an economist. He's a good economist, by the way. Told you credit where credit is due. When he was finance minister of Israel, he did incredible things for the Israeli economy. And in large part, obviously not exclusively, but in large part, the health of the Israeli economy today is thanks to reforms that he put in back in the day, 25 and 30 years ago. Fair is fair. But he's an economist, which means he doesn't understand human behavior. And I want to do this as a sort of as a theoretical segment, but I'm going to do it very light, don't worry. I know people hear theory. In macroeconomics, and this is very simplistic, but it's superficial, but it's still true. If we look at the two poles of economics, on one side is Karl Marx, and on the other side is Adam Smith. Karl Marx is collectivism, socialism, communism, and all that good stuff. And Adam Smith is basically free market economics, etc., more in the direction of what traditional American economics outside of New York. I'm a New Yorker, you have no idea how much it pains me. Marx and Smith disagreed on virtually everything. The one thing they agreed on, they were wrong. They both believed, each in his own way, that human behavior is driven by economic rationality. Money makes the world go round. And that is fundamentally, demonstrably false. And you don't have to be a radical jihadi Islamic organization like Hamas to show that it's false. People, if economic rationality drives behavior, what it basically means is every value you have can be bought. Is that true? Of course not. You wouldn't sell your religion. You wouldn't sell your country. You wouldn't sell most of your family. Right? These things are priceless. Priceless, that's what it means. Priceless is irrational. Priceless means it's not for sale at any price. And he thinks that by giving them billions, he can buy them off. And he's wrong, I will say again, not because they're radical Islamic fanatics, but because they're human beings with beliefs. And by the way, take this in the tone and context that it's meant, can I include myself? We of all people should understand that, because we wouldn't sell ours either. And that becomes the thinking. Now, it also happens for a very good reason, for an honorable reason, a righteous reason. Deterring Hamas means no war. No war is good. My advisor in grad school, a brilliant sociologist named Morris Janowitz, used to teach, among the many, many, many things I learned from him, the only real decisions you ever have to make are choosing between bad and worse. Any idiot can choose between good and bad. And between good and good, why agonize? Pizza with the mushroom or without the mushroom? Right? That's Janowitz. As his student, I've expanded on that thought, and I will say the following. What that means is that every real decision made, including personal, real decisions are bad decisions. Because you've chosen bad over worse. And if you've ever been faced with a really tough decision and weren't happy with your choice, that's why. That's why. Because that was the choice that was forced on you by circumstances that said, this is the least bad option I've got. I distinguish between bad and wrong. In other words, nobody can convince me that the decision to go to war is a good decision, but it might be the right decision. Okay? But as long as you stay in the frame of good and bad, choosing not to go to war is good, relative to going to war. Deterrence, buying them off, paying them off, creating this idea that we can keep them under control is very enticing. It also means that I don't want to inadvertently instigate a war by overreacting to things. So that on the morning of the 7th, everything is half step back. And the system has been regularized into thinking, don't overreact. By the time they realize that it's not an overreaction, it's way too late. So that's how we get to the morning of the 7th. By the afternoon, the rank and file of the system had begun to respond. The upper echelon still hadn't. They were still in an exercise. They weren't getting a clear picture, so they couldn't make a decision. Because that's how you do it in an exercise. By the way, in an exercise on a command level, if you make a decision before you get all the data in, they criticize you. How you move your forces without knowing all these things? Well, in the real world, you're not going to know those things. And again, it's what you learn from the experience of hopefully only making the mistake once and surviving the experience. The lower echelons did respond. Small units began to move in on their own. Small unit commanders began to understand. And the fact is, and I never argue with miracles, miraculously, within less than 24 hours, we had shut down this 6,000 terrorist attack on southern Israel. We then went into a war, and I'm not going to go into the details, time limitations, maybe next lecture, next time, in which we learned an amazing amount on-the-job training. As I said earlier, very, very talented men and women. The training today is very different from what it was 4 years ago, because the people doing the training went through, and I think you'll appreciate this. I refer to it as the oral tradition, okay? Without overstating my importance, I wrote the written tradition. Right? But that tells you what, in general, what should be. The oral tradition tells you what is. And you need both. But you learn the oral by doing and passing it on and sitting with the other guys and saying, oh, yeah, that worked for us, and this worked for us. Well, maybe if we synthesize it, we'll come up with something that works in even other cases and so on. We've gotten to. But in the time that I have left, I want to talk about where we stand today. We fought a war with Hezbollah, or campaign. We fought a campaign with Iran. We've had to deal with the Houthis, with terrorists in all sorts of other places, Syria, and this is all ongoing. And here I have to get into American policy because America imposed itself now into this, for better and for worse. The for worse is, and I hate to say this, it seems to me that the people running the administration, and again I hate to say it, including the president, don't understand the region that I live in. They just don't get it. Witkoff says, Hamas promised me they would disarm. They're not such bad guys. All right, so how did Trump say when he spoke to the Israeli parliament? Steve Witkoff, everybody loves Steve. Well, you know what? I don't want Hamas to love me. There's some people you're better off not being loved by. Another misunderstanding, and I'm going to use Iran here as the example, the 12-day war. I will tell you now unequivocally and emphatically, I talked about this for those who were there on Sunday night, there was no 12-day war. There was a 12-day campaign. The war with Iran, by the way, America's war as well as Israel's, began in 1979 when Ayatollah Khomeini came to power. And it continues to this day and beyond because their raison d'etre, among other things, are to destroy the United States of America and destroy Israel. And I know because they say it outright. You know, when they say death to America, what do you think they really mean? Which means that there will be a war between the Islamic Republic of Khomeiniist Iran and America and Israel, as long as there are either an Islamic Republic or an America and Israel. As long as both sides exist, there's a war. Because, you know, I won't speak for you guys. We're kind of intransigent about this. When they say they want to kill me, I don't cooperate. There was a political cartoon back in the John Kerry days, and I hate to say it because I'm certainly not a fan of Kerry. Not a lot has changed in mentality in Washington. So the cartoon was a Hamas guy and an Israeli sitting across from each other at the negotiating table, and the Hamas guy says, "Kill all the Jews." And Kerry says to the Israeli, "Can't you meet them halfway?" So we had a ceasefire imposed in Gaza. We had a ceasefire imposed in Lebanon with Hezbollah. We had a ceasefire imposed with Iran. And I hate to tell you this, it did not bring peace to the Middle East for the first time in 3,000 years. Hamas is rebuilding. Hezbollah is rebuilding. Iran is rebuilding. And they are doing it openly. And they are doing it under the same principles that they did all along: to destroy America, destroy Israel, and wipe out the Jewish people. And make no mistake about it, they say it outright. So, cutting them slack is not healthy. And I don't predict, people who heard me Sunday night heard me say this, others who've heard me at other times might have heard me say this as well. I don't do prophecy. I am a disciple of two great political philosophers, Winston Churchill and Yogi Berra, who both said it's best to prophesy about things that have already happened. In the Middle East, long-term prophecy is tonight. Tomorrow, beyond the horizon. So I'm not telling you what will or will not happen, but I will say this. If things continue as they are now at the moment, we are looking at another major round in this war in 3 to 5 years at the most. At the most. Because that's how long it will take them to get back. Hamas, who said outright they want to do it October 7th again, they say it clearly. It'll take them about that long to get back into a position where they can do it again. From the Israeli side, it's incumbent upon us to make sure they don't. One, by doing everything we can to prevent that buildup, and two, by being as prepared as we possibly can so that when it happens, the results will be very different from what they were. And that's where we stand today. So on that happy note, in Israel we say we don't believe in miracles, we rely on them. I have no doubt who wins. It's my job, imposed and self-imposed, to make the cost of that winning as low as possible. That's the goal I set for myself and my friends and colleagues. So with that, Q&A? Or I just leave them in shock? Yeah. So I'm going to say something, or start with something that's a little strange to say in a house of worship. People who were at dinner last night heard this, so you can hear it again. Prayer is important. It's even very important. But there are times when the response is not prayer. Prayer is inappropriate. And I want to teach this through Hebrew Scripture. Moses has a great relationship with God. Right? And Moses appears in the 2nd through 5th of the 5 books. Right? He's not in Genesis. He appears early in Exodus and to his death in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. And if you read the text, at text value, you get the clear impression. I always have this image that God and Moses meet every morning for coffee, talk about what went on yesterday, what's going to go on today, a couple of stories. They talk, they interact, they argue. Conflict sociology says the absence of conflict means there's no relationship. Because absence of conflict is apathy. How you resolve it is the nature of a relationship. But no conflict means no relationship. God and Moses have a relationship. They argue, and Moses even wins some of the arguments, which is already kind of its own story, right? They show each other the greatest respect. Now, Moses respecting God is obvious, but God respects Moses. You can see also in the discourse, in the dialogue, that goes all the way back to the job interview. The burning bush, right? You know what it says? God sees Moses, come here, step into my office, take off your shoes. Moses says, yeah, what's going on here? God says, listen, I got a job for you. Moses, I don't want it. God says, I didn't ask you. Tells him what the job is. Moses, I'm not qualified. God says, you're not qualified to tell me whether you're qualified. Right? That's what it says, no? But I can't speak. He says, that's all right. That's why I gave you a brother. Go do it. There's a few more parts of what should I tell them. And by the way, I do have to tell you this. It does not say that I am or I am who I am. The Hebrew is ehiyeh asher ehiyeh. I will be that which I will be. It's future tense. That's a different sermon. There's one place in the Torah where God verbally backhand slaps Moses. It's the only place where he shows him disrespect. Children of Israel leave Egypt. Pharaoh wakes up a couple of days later, says, where are the Israelites? They say, we let him go. He says, what? Whose stupid idea was that? They say, he says, go after them. So they load up the chariots, and they take off after them across the desert. And they catch up with them on the shores of the Red Sea. And by the way, yes, I'm being a little humorous about it, but this is the story. The Israelites who a week ago were slaves panic. What else do you expect? Here's the vaunted imperial Egyptian army barreling down on them, and they have their back to the sea. And they turn to Moses, and they say, is it because there were not enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the desert? How's that for thanks? By the way, the text doesn't say this, but I guarantee you, at this point, Moses says to God, I told you I didn't want this job. But he gets a hold of himself. And he turns to the people, and he gives this amazing, rousing speech. He says, look upon the Egyptians. As you see them today, you will never see them again. You are about to see the power, the glory of God. And then he says, Adonai lachem lachem, va'atem tacharishun. God will fight for you, and you will be silent. That's when God slaps him. That's when God slaps him. The next verse is universally poorly translated into English. Not miss, but poor. I think it's King James, but it's one of the variants. God said to Moses, spoke unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? This will be the middle style, right? Except that's not what it says in the Hebrew. And I want you to listen to the Hebrew, because Hebrew, God's language, tells you stuff even if you don't understand it. It says, Vayomer Adonai al Moshe, and God says to Moses, listen carefully to the words. Ma titzak elai. Doesn't sound very nice, does it? The translation is, what are you screaming at me for? Speak to the children of Israel. and tell them to move. Now, Rashi, the great medieval commentator, jumps on this because he writes commentary on every single verse of the entire Hebrew Scripture and the Talmud. What's going on here? And he brings a midrashic text to explain it, and he says, God is saying to Moses, my people are in danger. Now is not the time for prayer. Now is the time for action. Prayer is not appropriate here. Action is appropriate. Now I'll give you Elliot's commentary on Rashi. There'll be plenty of time to pray when you get to the other side. You can sing and dance all you want. Now, you got to get the job done. And he raises his staff over the water. I'm skipping and paraphrasing. But then it says something else very interesting. It says, and then the children of Israel walked into the midst of the sea on dry land. And of course, many, if not all of you, know what that means. The Midrash says it was Nachshon ben Aminadav. It doesn't matter whether it's an individual or all of them. In order to get the sea to split, they had to march into the water first. The miracle doesn't happen when you stop on the side and say, I'm not getting my feet wet. Could you? You'll be standing there a very, very long time. Well, not that long because the Egyptians are coming. You want the sea to split, you have to march into the water. And the Midrash says that he had to march into the water, Nachshon ben Aminadav, until it was above his mouth and his nose. In other words, with the understanding that if the water didn't split, he would drown. Then it split. I'll give you one more. I'm only a little bit over, so I can get away with it. Anyway, he's smaller than I am. You know that from the time they leave Egypt until they get to the Jordan, when the children of Israel travel, they are led by day by a pillar of cloud and by night by a pillar of fire, except in one place, at the sea. When he splits the sea, check it out in the text. The pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire move behind them to make sure the Egyptians don't get to them, separate them from the Egyptians. What's the message? God says, I got your back, but you have your marching orders. You don't march, I don't have your back. And if you understand all of what I've just said, you see that the order, the command is to do, to take action. God will complete the miracle. He'll close that gap for you. But not if you stand and just say, can you do it for me? Because I'm a little tired today. Or it's a little scary out there. Or it's a little uncomfortable. That's not when it happens. The miracle of October 7th was when all of these people, these kids from all around Israel, rushed to the sound of the gunfire and made it happen. And they prevented additional catastrophes that they didn't even know about, like Hezbollah not coming in as a result. And other things, again, my next trip, next lecture. But those miracles happened because individuals and small groups said, we got to get down there. We have no idea what's going on. It's catastrophic, but we're going. And that's how the miracles happen.
So here's the question. Should we pray or should we go?
I'm out of here.
So listen, we're going to say a prayer. We're going to say a prayer for Elliot. We're going to say a prayer for Israel. We're going to say a prayer for ourselves, right? So stand with me. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's It's been a blessing. Oh, God of heaven, we humble ourselves before you. There's no God like you. You have shown yourself faithful to all of creation. And we are so fortunate because you don't treat us as our sins deserve. You are always redemptive towards us. We need you. Our family needs you. Our friends need you. Our world needs you. Elliot and his family need you. We ask your divine presence to be with him and his family, that you'll use him just like you do to do those things that people need to have done, those words that they need to hear spoken. So we pray, Lord, you'll guard his health, give him answers to his prayers, bless his life and his family, and meet their needs. We pray for Israel tonight, your hand to be upon her, that you would show the world that there's a God in Israel who still fights for his people. We ask, oh God, tonight that you'll help us to be better followers. That there's a time to pray and there's a time to do what needs to be done. Help us to lean on you more than we do. Help us to know you better than we know you. Help us to seek your face more than we seek your hand. Thank you for these who took the time to be here tonight. We ask your blessing upon them. We all have needs. Thank you for being a God who cares about our needs. We love you tonight. In your name, amen. God bless you as you go. Thanks for being here tonight.